In SAFe, the scaled agile framework enterprise, this large agile framework, they've included team topologies. My issue here is I don't think they actually included team topologies. I think they said they included it. I think they have a huge article about this topic, but I don't actually see team topologies in here. I see kind of a Halloween costume, right? This is like a poor imitation of what I see in team topologies, and I think they missed several of the most important concepts. And I'm going to walk you through that today because I think it's really almost dangerous what they're showing you because they avoid the core concepts of team topologies and the concepts that help us understand how to create healthy teams with fast flow and many of the guiding principles in there. And they attempt to represent that inside of their own frameworks that are almost the kind of stuff that team topologies is helping us get out of. So I want to walk you through that and just explain this point by point. So if you go to their website, we will see things that appear to be, a good collaboration with SAFe people. We have a quote from the authors, and then we have the diagram. The only problem is the authors don't like that this is here. So that's the first warning sign for me is the authors of these concepts say that's not this concept. So their guidance basically has a few core sections on their document, right? They have an overview, they have some details, they go into a definition of what the team types are. And then over here, we have agile teams on the art. So everything above it is an attempt at explaining what the team shapes are and the purposes behind those teams, which is not wildly incorrect, but it's just a little bit funny. Here's the major part that I think is the dangerous part of what Scaled Agile is trying to do with team topologies. And that is they're trying to take team shapes and put them on the Agile release train, right? And I'll come back to that in just a moment, but I think that's the core thing. And if we scroll through it, most of this discussion is about how do we do Agile release trains with team topologies. And then we walk through a few examples of how to make arts out of arts and put trains together. This is a big concept in Scaled Agile, are these trains. It's really not a discussion of team topologies. It's how does SAFe think you can put a team shape onto an art. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Agile Release Train, I've just changed windows here. The Agile Release Train is a way to deliver some piece of value to your customers, right? So you define, build, validate, release something. Sounds like what we want from a team. The challenge is these release trains are not teams, right? They are a way for us to coordinate really big projects, right? So this is their example, right? And I'm literally on their webpage. You have a team, they do some iterations, and they miss the integration point. So the idea is you're orchestrating a very large feature that requires integration of all these different pieces. And missing those integration points will increase project risk and failure, right? So lots of teams working on one big project, integrating at the end, and then you can only deliver as late as your latest project. And that's true. And so their solution with the Agile Release Train is release early and often to give integration points between systems so that you minimize the risk of integration failure at the end. And this is a big problem in a lot of different industries as well. If you look at traditional hardware design, things that, you have a software system and you need to merge that with hardware and you need to integrate it with a big system. The end, that integration stage is always a challenge. So what they're saying is do that early and often. And that is a reasonable argument. The other thing here, for those of you who don't know, PI, that's your program increment. And so that's every session. You have all of your teams get together and do a big dependency mapping exercise, right? So this team here needs to work with this team over here. And so a typical dependency mapping exercise would look like this, right? You'd have iteration one, this team, the lions, they're going to work on a task and bears are going to work on something. And that's depended on by lions who in iteration 1.2 will do something, and every iteration people are getting on the release train and doing something, right? This is a mega project that has dependencies as a foregone conclusion. It's a mitigation of dependencies, right? It is, we have mitigations, let's try to manage the problem. Like, let's add transparency to the problem, let's try to make it easier to foresee the upcoming challenges, right? This is what this is. And you have a sense check of, is our mega project reasonable? In a nutshell, that's really what SAFe is about. And that's what these agile release trains are for, is get that program into increment together, put your teams on that, do the incrementing. Now, here's what doesn't make sense to me. That is not about what Team Topologies is for, right? Team Topologies is an alternative change, which is thinking about how do we, from first principles thinking, remove the necessity to do that type of work in the first place, right? How do we make it so that those teams do not have all of those interdependencies? How do we pull those out of the system? How do we design out of that, right? How do we guide our organizations to not have these challenges? The discussion here on Agile Release Train is not about pulling out the dependencies from teams and making them fast flowing and healthy and balancing cognitive load. It's a conversation around essentially what it really looks to me like is assigning teams names that are the same as what Team Topologies said, but we don't have a real discussion around the interaction model of these teams, right? So I think the red flag for me here is I see two streams and they are enabling. Now, that can happen. It's probably the less typical case, right? I think the default case you would see here is one stream offering another something as a service, or collaborating towards removing that necessity or something like this. But in the Agile Release Train design, they're enabling each other. And this is a bit of a challenge because the Agile Release Train is a conversation over, many, many iterations, right? So, in some companies, this might be half a year. And in Team Topologies, we have those interactions around enablement and collaboration. Those should be, defined interactions that exist for one period of time and go away for the most part. There can be long-term interactions, but you probably should not have a long-term enablement interaction between two teams as the only interaction in this diagram, right? Like, who is working with the complicated subsystem and why and how is that solving? Is the complicated subsystem here, is that my bears? And is that the interaction here is complicated subsystem has to deliver something in order for lions to deliver something on a mega project? Because this is the handover of complexity, right? And I think a lot of people miss this core concept from Team Topologies, which is your interactions with other teams are in pursuit of not having to have these dependency lines in the first place, right? We remove the complexity of the problems. We don't remove a part of the work that should belong to the mission of that team, right? So if you have a stream-aligned team, you do not necessitate another team completing something before you most of the time, right? It helps you get out of that problem. And the doctrine is that, you can shift something into a team's cognitive load so they own it, and another team figures out how to simplify that problem for them, right? So we've talked about this a few times in my channel. If this stream here has something that's high cognitive load, this stream here, like for instance, let's say sending an email, is not very complicated these days, but let's assume they have a very complicated platform to do that. It could be that another team takes on building, maintaining, and running, sending an email, and the top team simply uses a simple interface. It doesn't mean they took away their mission for the value stream and they're dependent on that other team doing it. It just means that other team is helping them remove some of that burden. But it doesn't mean that stream is held captive, waiting for them to release something in order to keep pursuing their mission. And I think this is, for me, the red flag here is the lack of conversation around interaction modes. Even when we look up at the top, I think that's really the thing that I always find a lot of people who are incorrectly trying to use team topologies is they look at the shapes and they don't look at the interactions, right? And so this is, they took this from the authors of the book. So the interactions are here, but the interactions are where the conversation needs to be, right? The interactions are the thing that hold the system together and help us balance cognitive load and make sure things make sense and the system is cohesive. One of the most important things you can do as an architect of your organization, of your software, of any socio-technical system is not focusing in exclusively on the boxes and instead thinking about the arrows and the lines that connect things, right? The interactions of those things. That's what makes your system cohesive. That's where you get cascading failures. That's where, and inattention to thinking about dependencies and how do we make our teams not have these arrows between them in the first place. That's the kind of stuff that Team Topologies unlocks for us, right? Safe with program increments and Agile Release Train is a late stage mitigation to supervise problems that were not addressed. Team Topologies is trying to remove them, but putting Team Topologies on an Agile Release Train does not really address either of those topics, right? So we haven't addressed how this is removing complexity from our teams, how it's helping our teams ship faster. And here's the other thing that really annoys me about this is when we think about the art, if those are stream-aligned teams, or even if they're complicated subsystems, why are they forced into the same delivery cadence? If you have a fast-flowing team that can deliver to production every day for their value stream, why must they march in lockstep on some delivery schedule? Why can they not break free of that to deliver sooner or later if necessary, but ideally sooner? This is a coordination of a mega team with pseudo sub teams, right? This is the challenge here, and this is the failure of traditional project management, not thinking cross-functionally, not thinking about value streams, not thinking about reducing the complexity, and instead, accepting that those must be the way and handling them after the fact to try to compensate for it. Team Topologies is revolutionary because it's taking us out of that entirely, right? It says you can design this problem outside of your organization, right? You can get rid of it or you can minimize it from the outset before you have to deal with this. So I don't think they're necessarily complementary tools. Again, for me, the red flag is we have no conversation of interactions here, right? I just do not see a conversation of interactions. I see a conversation of how do we maintain the status quo of what an art is and label teams using the vocabulary used in Team Topologies. And it's just not useful.